Leave, Rico. Take your shot, fun boy. You got me dead bang.
Take your shot, Freddy boy. You got me dead bang.
Alright. Hey Nobleones, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking, and apparently we got a video dedicated to me and two more guys that I've never seen before. I swear, officer, they're medicinal. Shad has already posted his response video today, same time as me. You'll find a link in the description and pinned comment. Go check it out after you're done with this. Oh, who made this? I'm glad you asked. Fredda is a 24-year-old YouTuber from Norway who makes videos about history and gaming. As of the making of this video, his social media presence is 2 YouTube channels, X, Blue Sky, Twitch and Patreon. Alright, before I click, what do we think, guys? What do we think? Respectful, honest, decent, no logical fallacies, no ad hominem attacks, fair, balanced? It's in the channel description, right? So this video is gonna be fine, right?
It's not fine.
Let's look at his channel more closely. Quote, I try to hold myself to certain levels of decorum and respect, openness and general quality. As I will demonstrate beyond any reasonable doubt, this is a lie. Ironically, this is going to be a recurring pattern, by the way, with Fredda. Spoiler alert, I guess.
When I was younger, like most teenagers who were into fantasy and history, I was also into medieval history, because it had knights and swords and all that cool stuff.
Me too.
In terms of actually learning about this stuff, I didn't really have much of an idea where to start. Enter youtube.com. The early algorithm and my more sword and HEMA-obsessed friends very quickly started serving me videos from seemingly knowledgeable individuals talking directly into a camera and occasionally showing off their swords. Then, as I began my undergraduate studies and started learning more not just about history but also about how history is written, I started getting bored with these videos, verging on actively disliking some of them. I started noticing that a lot of the channels often relied heavily on rationalization and logic, not on evidence or sources.
This is a misrepresentation. All we do on this channel is use the sources. Of course, we also use reason and logic, he's correct about that, and there is nothing wrong with it. However, we read the ancient texts, usually in the original language, and have constantly actively discouraged people from using rationalization alone and to rely on the primary sources, material goods, literary and all other forms of evidence. Even a cursory look at my content would have revealed that fact. The funny thing is that I can already imagine you shaking your head, because you already know this. Thus, it begs the question, is he misinformed, or was this on purpose?
You might hear them say something like, if they did X, then Y would happen. That doesn't make much sense, so they probably did Z. It's all argumentation and deduction based on what they believe, their preconceived notions, and their experiences.
Provide a clip where I said that, please.
This approach to history can very quickly become problematic for many different reasons, but with these YouTubers I think something unique starts to happen. When the so-called history that they teach doesn't have to be backed up or justified by its connection to the sources, and when their personal experience takes primacy, then they start to believe themselves to be far more knowledgeable and qualified than they actually are.
Now there is a lot to unpack here, including the obvious gatekeeping attempt. I'll get back to this later because I want you to focus on the next sentence. All of this, it's incorrect, but it's a build-up to the lie. Watch.
They begin to quote-unquote reason themselves towards every answer. And for some reason, the end result of this development almost always looks like an hour-long video essay about why women don't belong in video games.
Alright, so what do we have here? A statement, but no clip to prove it. Massive red flag. So allegedly my position is that women don't belong in video games. I've never made a video like that, ever. See, that's the problem. After a charged statement like this, what he should be doing, if he was intellectually honest, is producing a clip to substantiate the claim, where I say this, but he can't do it, because I don't hold that position, nor have I ever complained about women in video games, ever. He made it up. It's a lie. Alright, I've just given you a preview of how this entire video is. Now, apart from the appeal and views that drama videos make, one ends up asking, why would he make such a video?
Thank you, Surfshark, for sponsoring this video. Surfshark provides a
To be more specific, what he's trying to do is called poisoning the well. The idea behind this manipulation tactic is that in argumentation, it means contaminating your opponent's credibility before you address their points, so that anything that they say afterwards is viewed with suspicion or outright dismissed by your audience. But please, go on.
The plan here is to revisit 3 channels that I watched something like a decade ago, those being Lindybeige, Metatron, and Shadiversity, to see where they are now and try to figure out what's going on with them.
Skipping ahead to the sponsored section, but don't forget to use code Fredda. Might as well call it code liar.
Back to the medievalists. First up, Metatron. Luckily, he has provided us with a perfect Rorschach test to figure out his politics and understanding of history.
Now, this sentence caught my attention. I think finally, after a veritable cornucopia of lies and manipulation attempts, I think Fredda may have accidentally told the truth. That's what this is all about. He doesn't look at the historical statement and then use the sources to validate or counter the creator's position. He first tries to figure out my politics, and then he acts accordingly. This is a confession. Well, how about we figure out his politics? On his X account we read, Marx had some ideas, with a picture of a gulag in the background. I swear you can't make this shit up. On prolewiki, the communist Leninist version of Wikipedia, yeah, that's a thing, comrade. His ideology is listed as communism, Marxism. Well, will you look at that? I did notice an unusually high number of tankies in my comment section lately. Gee, I wonder why. Maybe there is a relation there. What do you think, detective? Any causal links? To be fair, the guy is far left, so I'd say far right, moderate conservatives, centrists, moderate left, liberals, libertarians, progressives. We are all his enemies anyways, so he has plenty of choice. See, that's the difference between someone like me. If it's nonsense, I debunk it, and if it's correct, I'll say it. Regardless of the political positions the person making the statements has. In other words, I first look at the info and the validity thereof on their own merit. Then, if it's relevant, I look at the politics of the creator. Also notice this, I'm clearly intellectually honest. For him, he has never made a video to debunk someone on the left. Does that sound like unbiased academic neutrality to you? Just telling it how it is? Facts over feelings? More like Gulag over Stalin? Make no mistake, Fredda is a propaganda channel.
Us with a perfect Rorschach test to figure out his politics and understanding of history.
Was Nazism left-wing or right-wing? This question is a form of ahistorical syllogism. In my opinion, there are 2 major problems here. One, they use the American left-right dichotomy or political spectrum, and they forcefully apply it to historical European political regimes and ideologies. 2, they use 21st century political spectra and juxtapose them over 20th century politics.
The core of his issue in regards to this is a phenomenon called presentism, though he doesn't use that word because it's a word an actual historian would use.
A word an actual historian would use. Oh my gosh, what a sanctimonious narcissist. Fredda's argument. Metatron doesn't use the word presentism. Real historians use the word presentism. Hence, Metatron is no real historian. Point the finger and mock. Let's take this at face value. Regardless of my phrasing here, my point is conceptually accurate, even if I don't use the term presentism. But you see, that doesn't matter here, because Fredda wants you to believe that if you don't use a particular term, your entire argument is invalid, as stupid as that sounds. Do you see how weak of a line of argumentation this is once you actually look at it? And pardon me if I indulge, but this type of argument is not what a real historian would use. He's not even trying to refute the point. He's trying to establish dominance, and in his mind, intellectual superiority. It's a narcissistic cry, and it's easily identified and refuted. But I don't even need to do this. And you know why? Here is one of many examples directly from a video posted 1 year ago titled "Why Did I Do This to Myself?" on minute 441. And he brings forth constantly is that of presentism. I do use the word presentism all the time. It was another lie. I'm getting embarrassed for him.
Instead, he calls it an ahistorical syllogism. Presentism is a complicated subject, and there's varying definitions and ways to use the term. But one use of the term is to describe the way in which the present exerts pressure on the historian's construction of the past.
Anyways, let's go into the ahistorical syllogism, because in fact, it was a very apt descriptor. While it is correct that the word presentism would have also been appropriate in this case, they are not the same. I chose this word specifically in my script because I thought it fit better with the point I was trying to make, and it was useful when conducting an analysis. A syllogism is a type of logical argument that uses deductive reasoning to arrive at a conclusion based on two premises. It's a foundational concept in classic logics, especially in Aristotelian logic. Syllogisms are at the heart of deductive reasoning. If the form is valid and the premises are true, then the conclusion must also be true. However, we need to be careful because a syllogism can be logically valid but factually wrong if the premises are false. An example would be, all fish can fly, a salmon is a fish, therefore a salmon can fly. The logical form is intact, but the major premise is false. So, in this context, a ahistorical syllogism would imply a syllogistic argument or line of reasoning that fails to consider or is indifferent to the historical context of the ideas and events being discussed. In essence, what I was suggesting here is that we have to be careful when using a form of reasoning, even if it draws from a logically valid premise, because it could potentially lead to inaccurate or irrelevant conclusions. So I was saying be careful to use only reason and logics when discussing the past. Do you remember when he actually accused me of only using reason and logics to discuss the past? I would call this a lie too, but I'll be honest with you, I don't think this one is a lie. I just think he didn't understand. Coming from the guy who explains every word like his audience are idiots. Case in point.
Truth. By ideal, I mean that it's the goal, but in practice, it's one we'll never quite fully reach.
See what I did there? I made a statement about something that he does, and then I found a clip to prove that that is indeed what he does, and my words were not hyperbole. He explained the meaning of the word ideal like his audience is a bunch of imbeciles. I'd like to stress that. Not the meaning of quantum entanglement. Ideal. That's how you make a statement about someone else. Now, differently from him, I couldn't put a sponsor on this video because of the controversial nature of this engagement, even though I'm just defending myself while he lied about me and was financially rewarded for it. But there is one thing I can do, and that is sponsoring myself. As you know, we have created a Metatron plushie for all of our fans and supporters, and we are really trying to hit 200 sales. We are kind of far from it. We still need about 90 sales to be placed, and we only have a few days. If you do like my videos, please consider getting one plushie now. Thank you so much.
The issue about this complaint about history that wants to put the historian outside of the historian's context is that it essentially wishes for a history without the historian.
What does this have to do with me?
You're asking for an analysis of history that stands apart not just from the historian, but also from the time in which the analysis is being conducted.
I what?
A history that exists as an objective and true story to be simply uncovered, untainted by interpretation.
For crying out loud, have the decency to use an argument that I actually make. How about that?
This is impossible to accomplish. History has to fit into modern understandings of the world, and this, alongside many other things, of course, might be a point where me and Metatron fundamentally disagree.
Yep, and had you been civil, dropped the I am better than thou attitude and the character assassination attempts, we could have actually engaged in this disagreement about fundamental truth in a way that would foster academic discourse. But you chose the let's make a slander hitpiece video instead.
But I don't actually think so, and I'll explain why later on. To close off this point about history being a conduit between the past and the present, let me quote American historian Shad.
Yeah, let's not, considering the fact that he's gonna use now a very long and boring quotation to try and refute an argument that isn't mine, therefore wasting my and your time. Let's skip ahead. Hey Fredda, what's going on here? That's not what my video looked like. Even his video editing software is trying to twist my points to an unrecognizable state. To overlap neatly and perfectly with 20th century European political factions in order to come out with an answer is a flawed analytical method.
Yes, trying to figure out if Hitler was a, quote, I'm with her guy or a member of the Republican Party in 2016 is silly. But luckily, that is not what historians and others are actually doing when they approach this topic.
Two problems here. First, I wasn't complaining about historians. I was talking about people who deal with these topics, mostly YouTubers, so already it's a strawman. However, there are some academics that do nonsense like this, so I'm actually gonna do that now, because you're wrong, regardless. Even though it wasn't my original point, I'll agree with this fictitious version of myself that you created. Good historians don't do that, so we can agree with that, but activists who use their degrees to push their agenda? Oh, they will. Not that I need to, anyone watching this knows this already, but I'm happy to prove this with empirical data anytime. What do we do now? Well, to answer this correctly, first, we need to ensure objectivity to our analysis.
These guys very often present themselves as, quote, rational skeptics who are just presenting the objective facts.
This is not how you make a response video, Fredda. You don't just say how other people present themselves, you prove it with clips. I swear, this thing you do when you put words into people's mouths they have never said and then try to ridicule and attack them for those words you fabricated, you do it so much that it has just become second nature to you. It's muscle memory at this point with this guy.
I talked more about this method in my previous video, whereby it was used by a literal out-and-about Nazi.
And here it is. I was actually surprised it still hadn't come to that. Here is the mental manipulation. Let's look at this closely. I talk about objective reality and facts. Then he says that so do the actual Nazi. What is the conclusion he wants you to draw then? Metatron says X, Nazis say X, Metatron is a Nazi. You see, in this segment, Fredda used two logical fallacies at once, and it's been extremely disingenuous and dishonest. First of all, framing language. He's using emotionally loaded terms, aka Nazis. Also, he's using the so-called association fallacy, sometimes referred to as guilt by association, which is a type of logical fallacy in which someone argues that a claim is true or false based on the character, group, or belief of the person making it, rather than on the merits of the argument itself. In other words, he's attempting to discredit someone's argument by associating them with an unpopular, disreputable, or extreme person or group, even if the connection is weak or non-existent, the latter being the case here. The reason why this is a fallacy is because truth is not determined by who holds a belief, but by the empirical evidence behind it. That's easily proven by the obvious fact that even morally corrupt individuals can be correct about some things. Hence, even if we were in the presence of a real tether between whatever kind of logical or methodological framing I was using with the Nazis, once again, an association that isn't true, but even if it were, associating a claim with a disliked source doesn't automatically invalidate the claim. To think critically, we must slow down and disconnect ideas from identities and evaluate claims on their own merits, not any given association, real or imaginary. Problem is that his intent here is trying to build a questionable historical parallel, exploiting his audience's emotional biases, tribalism, and moral disgust, rather than encouraging rational evaluation of any given data. Another piece of evidence that demonstrates the political propagandistic nature of this channel.
The general gist of it is to depoliticize history as a science, and to portray it as a series of crystallized, unchanging facts, which just so happen to correspond to the person's worldview. You assert things as, quote, just the facts, and reason your way towards why these so-called facts you're presenting are true, without relying on much evidence produced by trained historians.
I have a team behind my production. One is a trained historian, former archaeologist, 2 years of experience digging in Syria. One is a published author. One is an anthropologist with a postdoctoral degree. One is an Egyptologist PhD. I can continue. Also considering that I've shown their names, qualifications, and faces on screen multiple times, but it doesn't matter, because he doesn't care about the truth, nor does he care about evidence. He's gonna say they don't exist. Another lie.
You sidestep the actual debates and uncertainties of history in order to simplify the larger picture. The point is to cleverly avoid actually engaging with history and instead relying on debate and argumentation.
Once again, strawman number... You know what? I actually lost count. What is it by now? 15? Not my statement. I never said this. Why is this video about me if you're not gonna use a single thing I said you could have put Kermit the Frog at this point on the thumbnail and graphics and it would have made zero difference.
I've talked about so-called objective history in past videos. I'll summarize by saying history is aspirationally objective, but practically cannot be objective because the fundamental nature of the field necessitates all sorts of selection and interpretation that cannot be fully divorced from subjectivities.
Now, to try and strengthen this absurdity that he has just mentioned, he's gonna read a quote to, as always, pretend to be smarter than you, as he does. But before we get to that, let me say this. Alright, so now he's attacking the concept of objective truth in relation to history. If at any point you had any doubt that this was anything but a propaganda channel, welcome to Reality Check.
Here's a quote by E.H. Carr from his book What is History? Quote,
Hold it there, Professor. Rather than listening to the quote, boring you to death, let's analyze his utilization of it. Upon closer inspection, another interesting element to this becomes clear. A lot of Fredda's videos are quotation after quotation by volume. Given, using the occasional quotation to strengthen a position is fine, but his videos are literally him reading what someone else said at you for money.
Thank you, Surfshark, for sponsoring.
Fredda is not used to use the sources to make his own contributions to the historical field as any advanced academic does. He's used to repeat what someone else says, as undergraduates do. Moreover, this is the best example of Dunning-Kruger effect. He knows a little, overestimates his knowledge and competence, but that's enough for him to think he's better than anyone else. I mean, look at this.
What does he even mean by this?
Where is the creativity? Where are the contributions? Where is academia? What makes your channel worth watching, Fredda, if all you do is read someone else's words? And mind you, historians can be wrong, so then you're not even educating. His video productions are just reading quotes from someone else, and all he adds are either full-on lies or ideologically driven, twisted facts that clearly clash with documented evidence upon close inspection. Moreover, the real reason why he quotes so much in his videos is not to educate. He's deploying another logical fallacy, called argument from authority. An argument from authority is a type of reasoning in which a claim is deemed true or more likely to be true because it is made by someone who is presented as an authority. These kind of arguments can be persuasive, but it's not a proof. Authorities can be mistaken, biased, or misquoted. In critical thinking and debate, the strength of an argument should ultimately rest on evidence and reasoning, not just on who said it. Anyways, now we get to the good stuff. Check this out. Focus on attitudes towards private property, individual freedom, and wealth redistribution patterns. If needed, even implementing a mathematical apparatus.
What does he even mean by this?
Also, we should explore and take into consideration the political allegiances that occurred historically and the sort of opposition to the regime in question, the Nazis. So let's do that.
Now, he says we're going to evaluate whether these regimes lean left or right based on those criteria, but first he constructs a new category called totalitarian dictatorship.
I'm sorry, what? A new category? They are totalitarian dictatorships. Are you gonna argue that they were not? How is it a new category? As we look into Google Ngram, we can immediately observe that the term and category has been in use in all sorts of publications for a very long time. The reality is that a historian would know that. A historian would use this word, didn't do his homework. Yet, he's always very quick to mock, belittle, and laugh.
What does he even mean by this?
Another testament of his extreme arrogance. Man, he must be fun at parties. Fredda is confusing categories with working definitions. Historians use these as theoretical frameworks all the time, not because they are perfect, but because they are useful, particularly for comparative analysis, which is what I'm doing here. What defines totalitarianism? Centralized authority, strength in the military, militarism with resources directed to domestic population, authoritarianism and dictatorial rule, repression of freedom of speech and freedom of the press, systematic elimination of political opposition by violence, expansionistic foreign policies, and conquest through military might. Already note that all three historical totalitarian regimes of the 20th century fit very neatly within this box. Okay, that's a fact, so there's no way he cannot possibly disagree with these, right?
Going back to his definition of totalitarian dictatorship, it has numerous issues.
God of Olympus, help us!
Imagine a brutal and repressive dictatorship that for one reason or another is incapable of carrying out expansionist foreign policy. By his definition, this may not be a totalitarian dictatorship because it's not invading its neighbors. Now imagine a dictatorship that does carry out belligerent and hostile foreign policy, and even invades countries, but doesn't actually annex these countries, instead leaving puppet regimes in their wake. Maybe on the other side of the planet even. They wouldn't fit the bill.
Here is something for you. Go back, rewind. No, do it now. Pick up your phone, rewind, and find the spot while I was giving my definition where I specifically said that in order to be classified as a dictatorial regime, it must tick all the boxes I provided. And failure of ticking even one automatically disqualified said regime from the nomenclature. Strawman.
The only really good criteria on this list that is practically useful in any sense is, quote, dictatorial rule.
Criteria is plural.
It stands to reason that for something to be a totalitarian dictatorship, if such a thing exists, it must of course be a dictatorship.
If such a thing even exists, when discussing history, I didn't invent the category. He really thinks it's a new category. This is ludicrous. You know what else fits? The fascists
And the communists under Stalin.
Oh, you didn't like that one, did you?
It stands to reason.
I thought you didn't use reason.
Beyond that, the definition is so broad as to encompass virtually every nation on Earth. Most states engage in aspects of these things to varying degrees.
Alright, let me get this straight. Every nation has militarism with resources directed to domestic population. Every nation has authoritarianism and dictatorial rule. Every nation has repression of freedom of speech. Well, probably fewer in charge, I guess. Systematic elimination of political opposition by violence. Are you out of your mind? How is this even a counter-argument? How did this get into his script and he thought, oh yeah, I really got him with this one. His list is stupid because every nation is like this. And this is a fantasy.
You personally have to make an assessment of how strongly you feel that a nation has enough of these things to qualify. This isn't the kind of objective measure he portrays it as. To demonstrate my point, he says he'll prove that these three nations fit the bill, and to do so he literally just goes down the list and makes an assessment and says that they do. He does a little, quote, thought exercise to prove that 1940s Germany didn't have freedom of speech.
And are we sure? Well, let me prove it to you. Let's do a little thought exercise. You are in 1940s Germany. You disagree with Adolf Hitler's opinions, so you go to Berlin and in front of the whatever government building that they have there, you say, Hitler was an idiot. Yeah. Do you think you're gonna survive that?
This isn't how you work with history. You don't think your way towards an answer, you find evidence to back up your claim. His argument here is 100% reliant on your personal understanding of Nazi Germany, not related to any evidence whatsoever. His argument is compelling because you understand Nazi Germany to be oppressive, and you're right. But he's not actually teaching you anything. He's saying, you believe this, therefore my point stands. This isn't history. He's pandering to you, and even though what he just said was correct, it is still pandering.
Oh, this is beautiful. He just said, he admitted that I am correct. Yet, he says there is no proof whatsoever that in Nazi Germany there was no freedom of speech. This is diabolical. The level of dishonesty of this guy is cosmic at this point. I don't even know how he has subscribers. Well, the ideologically driven, I guess. Also, since he accuses me of pandering to my audience, whatever the heck that means, from a channel that debunks both sides, let me demonstrate that it's actually a case of projection. He is the one who is pandering to his audience at the expense of historical reality. Also, I want you to notice one thing, because I did notice it since I made the original video, but you might have missed it. On this video, as usual, I attack arguments that are presented by both sides. He has systematically shown only those sections that he knows lefties would hate, but has also removed every section from my video where I said something right-wingers wouldn't like, but lefties would agree with. Such as, for example, the section where I say that just using the name National Socialism isn't enough as a criterion to decide whether Nazism was left-wing or right-wing. That is mental manipulation and lack of intellectual rigor if I've ever seen it. And I am the one pandering?
This is embarrassing.
So what this tells us is that these are not necessarily unique features of the right or the left, but they manifest as common ground on the extremes of said spectrum. It's the horseshoe effect. Extremes touch, even if, ideologically, when compared with communism, fascism is indeed right-wing.
Horseshoe theory is complete bunk. It relies on surface-level similarities between certain right and left-wing regimes in history. I don't think historians put much stock in the idea, instead opting for a more nuanced and holistic analysis that doesn't entirely sideline the ideological differences between these regimes.
To use your own words.
What does he even mean by this? What Metatron is actually observing isn't the similarities between right and left-wing extremes, but the similarities between two different regimes wielding state power. The reason I think that the horseshoe theory is compelling is that both Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union were ideologically opposed to democratic liberalism, which means that those regimes in many ways were both quite different from the ones most of us live under today. The difference from us, is something they both share, even if at a closer look the regimes really aren't that similar.
Horseshoe theory is not a perfect representation. It's better than anything this guy has tried to present as objective and true. You see, the theory is not meant to erase ideological differences. It's meant to highlight behavioral and structural similarities between regimes that claim to be opposites. Totalitarian control, cult of personality, censorship, mass surveillance, these can emerge on either extreme, and it's a fact. Fredda's mistake is once again conflating ideological labels with functional outcomes. It simply shows that when taken to their extremes, any ideology often abandons liberty and human rights into what could be considered a chilling historical pattern. But once you start to look at this from the American political perspective, then the situation becomes muddy, if you will, necessitating a more nuanced item-by-item approach.
If you recall, early in this video he said that one problem with this is that Americans are trying to apply their 21st century understanding of politics onto a 20th century European political movement.
Yes, I'm saying that.
And now he's saying that because there are differences between Nazi Germany and the positions of American Republican voters, the situation is muddy and Nazi Germany isn't entirely right-wing.
No, I'm not saying that. You absolute clown. I said we shouldn't call the Republicans or the Democrats Nazi. We shouldn't use either. They weren't neither uniquely left or uniquely right. And everyone watching even his manipulated version of my video knows that. He was accusing me of having manufactured an extra category to put them on, totalitarian dictatorship. And on that video I also say that the Nazi movement was considered syncretic, which means it has elements from the left and the right. It's all on his video as well. What a liar! Unbelievable, absolutely despicable.
Why are you looking at it, quote, from the American political perspective? Surely there must be better criteria than the political understanding of the median American voter. Full offense intended to the median American voter.
Oh my gosh, I have to explain the obvious. I am looking at this from the perspective of American politics and the general public precisely because oftentimes people will claim said totalitarian regime to belong to one side or the other just because they're using it as a way to insult people they disagree with. How do you not see that? I'm focusing on what people are doing wrong. So how silly is it to ask if it's a good prism of evaluation? It's not, Sherlock, that's why I'm debunking it. Also, his despise and all-right mocking attitude towards Americans is very off-putting. I would imagine if you were to look at your analytics now, you get a lot of views from those Americans that you despise so much. Maybe you should be a little thankful and respectful, since they literally make you money. A typical mentality of an entitled 20-year-old who once again thinks he's better than you because he could afford an education, and in his mind, he has better politics. More valid ideas. You see, the Nazis, for example, had nationalized healthcare. Government was deeply involved in every aspect of industry, so we're talking about big government. The Nazis were not in favor of free market capitalists. And yes, I'll defend this one in the next section. And all of this sounds left of center to an American. So, it is mixed.
All of this is of course said with zero citations.
Was I wrong? You dropped it? Is it another one of those cases when you're gonna say I'm correct? On the following section, I'm going to present the characteristics of the regime, and then you decide where it leans the most towards.
As so often happens, these guys pretend they're just presenting the facts, and then they pretend to outsource that analysis to you. A historian's job is to provide analysis, not to say, you decide what happened, smiley face. They're being lazy, dishonest, and cowardly.
Says the guy who hides his face and doesn't tell us his name. Show me you're not a coward. Show us your face. Come on, Fredda.
And they hide behind this veneer of objectivity to push impressionable people who are unfamiliar with the topic towards specific conclusions. In the following section, he doesn't cite anything at all and for some reason brings up whether or not the Nazis had, quote, identity politics.
A central idea of communist ideology was opposition to private ownership of the means of production, which blended with economic intervention within the private and public sectors.
What do you mean a central tenet of communist ideology is economic interventionism in the private sector? A central tenet of communist ideology is the opposition to the existence of the private sector. What is economic interventionism in the public sector? That's already owned by the state. That's the public sector.
Now, to that, Nazism was different up to a certain extent. Let me clarify. Their overall economic approach favored big business and opposed labor unions, which of course doesn't make it sound socialist by any means.
All of what he just said is correct. See Adam Tooze's Wages of Destruction or my past video, Capitalism in Nazi Germany, if you want more info.
Did you notice a pattern here? He often says, "What I say is correct." His own words. What does that tell you? It tells you that even though he knows I'm right, but he has to absolutely find something wrong because I'm a moderate, not a communist. And in his eyes, that makes me far right. That's all this is. Friedrich Pollock says, open quote, "I agree that the legal institution of private ownership was maintained and that many attributes characteristic for National Socialism begin to manifest themselves, albeit still vaguely in non-totalitarian countries. But does this mean that the function of private ownership did not change? I believe it reaches far more deeply and should be described as the destruction of all the essential traits of private ownership."
He quotes Friedrich Pollock as to why Nazi Germany's private ownership was functionally destroyed, and I'm pretty certain he got this quote from the Mises Institute, which is also where Tick History, who I covered in the past, got a lot of his stuff from.
I didn't. Also, once again, guilty by association tactics. This is tiring. Please learn how to be a decent individual and stop using manipulation tactics. Not because it's disrespectful to me, who cares? You hate me, I dislike you actively, it doesn't matter. But it's disrespectful to your own audience. That is the very reason why you even have a social media presence. Have some respect for your viewers.
The Mises Institute is a right-wing libertarian think tank. Metatron, of course, doesn't cite this quote properly, and in this instance, that is more important than you might think. For one, he actually misquotes Pollock, and leaves out the ending of the sentence. When you want to cut off parts of a quote that aren't relevant, you should indicate that you have done so. He does not.
By and large, this is a fair rebuttal. I should have added the parenthesis with the dots. That is totally fine, he's correct. I would have said if he hadn't done the manipulation thing a second ago. Still, it's not a misquote. It's a incomplete quote, since you're being pedantic. Misquoting is what you did to me.
The full quote reads, "should be described as the destruction of all the essential traits of private ownership, saving one exception." Pollock's argument isn't that capitalism is gone, it's that capitalism's management has been transferred into the hands of the state, while keeping the actual ownership and profits in private hands. He calls it, quote, "divorce between ownership and control." It's conceptualized as state capitalism. I don't fully agree with that, but that's what Pollock believes, and it isn't quite what Metatron represents his beliefs as. This isn't the most important thing that Metatron leaves out, though. The most important part is that this was written in 1941, long before any serious historical appraisals of Nazi Germany had been undertaken, by the simple virtue of the fact that the Nazi period wasn't over yet. Even the economist writing here, not as a historian but as an economist, cannot hope to have all the information and data necessary available to him.
The fact that he's an economist and not an historian, when you're talking about economy, is a plus, not a minus, as he's trying to represent it as. Completely moot point.
What follows is an argument that Hitler would allow private ownership and management of business so long as the businesses complied with the needs of the state. And in Metatron's view, this isn't really private ownership or capitalism. He calls this
socialism disguised as capitalism.
This is central to his argument that Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union were cut from the same cloth. He says that Nazi Germany looks like capitalism, but is actually socialism.
Exactly, I double down on that. And also, you know what is capitalism and not socialism?
Thank you, Surfshark, for sponsoring this video. Surfshark provides a
Grab all that capitalist money and keep lying.
I should probably have a little talk with Surfshark, by the way, with whom I will never work ever, considering they just financially rewarded someone with thousands of dollars for a video where he associated me with the Nazis, publicly. And to be crystal clear, if it was just a video where he disagreed with me, even vehemently, absolutely put the sponsor. Sponsors usually review the video before they greenlit it.
What follows is a very funny section that might seem familiar to some that have watched my old videos on What of Alt Hist. These guys all use the same talking points.
What does these guys even mean? What does it mean? Look at the tribalism. Anyone who isn't a far-left communist like him is these guys. These guys. Alright, now I would like to dedicate a small section to race. With that being said, let's also remember that if you think that racism denotes right-wing position, then you would classify Karl Marx as a right-winger. And the reason I say that is because if you actually read the article he published in 1844 called On the Jewish Question, you would absolutely consider to be racist.
He claims to have read On the Jewish Question, but probably hasn't.
Hey, do you have a citation for that? Any evidence for that statement, mister? I need to prove everything, I'm super historian. Of course I read it, we read it in high school, for crying out loud.
Or if he did, he didn't really understand it. It was written in response to Bruno Bauer's The Jewish Question, hence the title, On the Jewish Question. Bruno Bauer's text is very anti-Semitic, and Karl Marx is arguing against Bruno Bauer's anti-Semitic arguments. Karl Marx himself was born to a Jewish family. To modern ears, much of the language employed by Marx and even the title understandably sounds shocking, but that's because we're viewing it outside of its historical context. That being said, there are examples of Karl Marx being overtly racist in letters, particularly towards La Salle, which Metatron could have highlighted.
Oh wait, he's not doing it again, is he?
Karl Marx undoubtedly harbored certain anti-Semitic and other racist beliefs.
Yep, I'm right again.
But bringing up this particular text is a very lazy and widespread right-wing talking point that isn't really convincing.
Now get ready for pure hypocrisy.
I would argue that Karl Marx was perhaps less racist than the average German man in the 1800s.
He just did the very thing that he has been accusing us of doing for this entire video. He used his own reasoning without any evidence to back it up to make a statement about people in history. Checkmate.
But that this also isn't saying much because German men in the 1800s were very racist. I won't belabor this point because the point Metatron is trying to make is silly. Racism is not an inherently right-wing position, and nobody sensible would argue as such. Anyone can be racist.
So once again, I'm right. And in fact, we could have agreed on this. Do you see the impossibility to have a discourse with someone like this, who just argues for the sake of the propaganda message, even when we could have agreed upon something?
I believe he's saying this defensively, because he himself knows that racism is more prevalent on the right.
Not if you count anti-white sentiment.
In fact, much of this video can be viewed as defensive, particularly the last portion in which he gets very hung up on whether or not Hitler is a Christian, which I don't think is very relevant.
Who cares if you think it's relevant or not? It's my video, so I chose that section because it was relevant to me.
In the conclusion to this video, Metatron invites you to do a political compass test and try to imagine what Hitler's answers to each question would be, and then see where you end up. Once again, relying on your preconceived notions of who Hitler was, instead of actually educating.
To him, educating is brainwashing you. You're not allowed nor supposed to use your critical thinking. Whatever you think you know is irrelevant and means nothing. Fredda's idea of education is you sit down, shut up, and listen to your betters, meaning him. He tells you what you're supposed to think and what is correct, and you cannot doubt it. It fits in perfectly. Therefore, Nazism should not be judged by whatever words Hitler crafted, and it should not be considered neither left nor right-wing, at least in the political sense. The only thing in which Hitler believed was accumulating personal power, and we have a name for that: totalitarianism. Thank you for watching.
To conclude, I'd like to read a couple of quotes from Roderick Stackelberg.
And once again, quotation after quotation after quotation. That's Fredda 101. Also, that's not a historian, man. That's not a historian.
I think Metatron isn't a very big fan of Hitler,
The only true statement he has made when it comes to my characterization.
and is understandably also not a fan of his politics and his views being associated with Hitler, which is why he wants as much distance as possible from him and his movement. Of course, no reasonable person is going to look at the Nazis and think that they were left-wingers. Not even Metatron thinks that. So his only recourse is to say nothing and pretend like it's nuance. I remember Metatron as a channel that did talks on history topics, but now it seems to largely be low-effort React content. And I mean lower effort than mine. I at least write a script.
And here is the, once again, return of the ad hominem attacks. This is a perfect opportunity to show why Fredda despises logics and reason so much. What he just did now defies logics. But think about it. He's accusing me of being a low-effort React channel on a video that he made, which is a React video to me. The lack of self-awareness is unbelievable. Not to mention it's also false because out of my last 15 uploads, 13 are my own original work. But as we just demonstrated multiple times by now, truth is the antithesis of Fredda.
And also, it seems much of it panders towards right-wing young men who are frustrated about video games being too woke.
Let's examine his language usage for a moment. This, that he just used, is a narrative trap. Fredda wants to frame all criticism of modern media as, open quotes, right-wing rage bait, close quotes, when in reality, many viewers, left, right, or centrist, feel alienated by preachy, ideologically loaded entertainment media. This isn't the language that a historian uses at all. Do you see now why it is very important to depoliticize history? 1. I haven't used the word woke in years. 2. My community is mixed because differently from you, I accept everyone. They can be left, right, center, or apolitical. It doesn't matter as long as you're a good person and you're not toxic, you're welcome. The usual politics in games and the culture war. In this case, the battleground is Oblivion Remaster. Man, Elder Scrolls 6, I really hope they don't put politics. I really hope they don't inject a lot of politics in these games. If it's a tiny little bit, it's not a big deal, I'll mod it out. And I'm just being honest with you. I'm not being hateful. I don't hate anyone. Live your life however you see fit.
He says if you're gay, if you use they/them pronouns, if you've got blue hair, then more power to you, so long as you live your life somewhere where he doesn't have to see you.
The one time that he was actually showing a clip, he has to twist my language. I never said that. That's disgusting, Fredda. Final Fantasy Tactics is one of my favorite games ever. That game is so political that it's insane, but it's not divisive. But it's also the idea of using the video game as a medium to inject your positions. That's when I'm starting to have a problem, because it feels like I'm being manipulated.
He's scared because the things he's seeing are different to what he's used to. He's not taking any sort of principled stance against people, quote, injecting their politics into games, because then he very much would not like Final Fantasy Tactics.
Here, Fredda, once again, insults your intelligence. Even if you're a left-wing fan of mine, are you really gonna sit down and let this guy tell you that the kind of political injection, whether you agree with it or not, in the modern video game space is the same as the type of politics that you find inside Final Fantasy Tactics?
Let me read what the original script, scenario writer, and editor's thoughts were on the politics of the game, published on June 5th with the announcement of the game's remaster. Quoting Yasumi Matsuno. Nearly 30 years ago, the collapse of Japan's bubble economy engulfed the nation's financial institutions in mountains of bad debt, triggering a wave of corporate bankruptcies, a sudden and extreme rise in unemployment rates, and stagnation of Japanese society as a whole. It was an era when many were robbed of hope, when dreams were measured by their price tag. Against this historical backdrop, I crafted a story. It was the story of Ramza, a young man who fought tirelessly against the entrenched social class system. It was the story of Delita, who sought to take advantage of this confusion and despair to advance his own social position. It was a story of a peculiar destiny in which friendship and betrayal intertwine. And now in 2025, a time when inequality and division are still deeply rooted in our society, I offer this story once again. The will to resist is in your hands.
Irrelevant. This is a false equivalence. The kind of politics that is injected today is left versus right. The kind of politics that you just read here is up versus down. Up versus down unites. Left versus right divides. Furthermore, there is a difference between a game with inherent political themes and a game being used as a platform for present-day ideological messaging. I never said all politics in games are bad, only that overt, agenda-driven injection of current politics can feel manipulative or immersion-breaking. Fredda's tactic in the final stretch is clear. Undermine your reputation to undermine your arguments. He tries to make disagreement seem immoral, but rhetoric is not truth, and moral posturing isn't scholarship. In the end, Fredda offers you a choice. Accept his interpretation, or be labelled reactionary, uneducated, or far-right. Yet, real scholarship thrives on civil disagreement. If the only acceptable stance is his, then it's not history he's defending. It's propaganda. I stand by my research, and I stand by the idea that history isn't a weapon. His videos aren't really about history. It's about control. Control over the flow of information, who gets to teach, who gets to think, and, due to the fact that I don't conform to his narrative, he made me into a target. Unfortunately, I happen to believe in something that Fredda, quite clearly, does not. The value of open civil disagreement. I believe that history is not a tribal battleground where you win points by calling your opponent names. It is an open dialogue, one that requires evidence, integrity, and a bit of humility. Fredda's video revealed a pattern of logical fallacies, misquotations, ideological projection, and character assassination attempts. It's performative and cynical. What are you trying to inject in my head?
Let's move on from Metatron.
Yeah, you can totally move on from me, but I'm not gonna move on from you now. More videos to come.